Okay, I think I've got it going to Facebook. I think it's just setting up now, and then we'll get going. Just checking my Padmanabha Maharaj's checklist, all the things, and then we can get going. Okay, so I'll start with Mangalacharan, as always. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Siddhanto Palasara Nityarasikam Hangsang Vilasatmakam Audaryakya Siddhama Sevakadanam Vishramba Bhakti Pradam Yatya Yukti Vichakshanam Bhagavato Vashishta Shaktya Sada Vandeham Tripurari Namakayating Sri Bhakti Vedantinam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Ajanulambita Bhujao Kanakavatata Sankirtanaika Pataro Kamalaya Takshao Vishwambarao Dijavarao Yuga Dharma Palao Vande Jagapriyakaro Karunavataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gauridaye Pushpavanto Chitro Shando Tumonudao Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charana Sukhao Sukado Paramananda Sundaro Subalo Priyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vandana Karite Mui Kata Shakti Dari Tamo Buddhi Doshe Mui Damba Matra Kori Tatapi Mukera Bhagya Manero Ulas Doshakshami Modame Koroni Jadas. Hare Krishna, everybody, welcome. So I'll get going. Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon and all the different time zones. I know we're spread out. I was just speaking to Kali Yuga Pavana, and it's amazing, isn't it, how spread out everyone is. It's the power of technology. So I'd like to thank, obviously, Guru Maharaj and also Padmanabha Maharaj for engaging us in this service. I, like many of you, I'm sure, who received the message, the dreaded message of Padmanabha Maharaj about doing class, giving class. I was really nervous instantly, like no clue what to think about, what to talk about. But I thought about it, and one book that really has been a big part of my personal journey in various ways has been a guiding force. And I think for a lot of devotees, it is Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, or at least the Eastern Ocean of Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. So I can't claim to be an expert on it. I'm not deeply scholarly in the truest sense of the word, but I have an interest in the philosophy, and I'd like to study it more. And this series has given an opportunity to go a bit deeper into it. And it's one stood out to me for a variety of reasons. And I'm sure most of you who are on the call or watching, you're aware of the importance of this text, Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, in our Sampradaya. But just for the benefit of anyone who might not be, just want to give some brief reasons why it's such an important text for us, particularly as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And before we get into the specifics in terms of refining our desire, which is really what this is about, this series. So as I'm sure you're all aware, Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu was written by Srila Rupa Goswami after he was instructed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Prayag. And so he then elaborated on those teachings. So Rupa Goswami heard those teachings directly from Mahaprabhu, and then he elaborated on them, drawing from the different Vedic literatures to support what he was presenting. And so what he really gave in Srila Prabhupada's words, the science of devotion, the science of bhakti. So I like this term my Guru Maharaj sometimes uses of conceptual orientation. So he gave this lens through which to view the Bhagavatam. or the conceptual orientation. It shapes how, as Gaudiyas, we approach the scripture and the rest of the Shastra and all the teachings found throughout the Vedic canon. So it helps us understand why we do what we do on some level, like, I guess, the mechanics, if you can call it that, but I don't like to use such a bland word for something so beautiful, of course. But we know the Vedas are vast, you know, and Krishna points out quite early on in the Gita that they deal with temporary results. Mostly they deal with the modes of nature, with karma kanda. And so Rupa Goswami has drawn from the Vedas to emphasize what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to give, which is obviously Krishna Prema, as being the best goal and the best presenting that path towards that goal. So obviously in itself, the fact that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke to Rupa Goswami, I think highlights it being an important text. But I thought it'd be nice also to be able to meditate on these personalities also, to go through a few of the personalities that give weight to the idea that it's an important text. And so Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is obviously a prominent teacher in our lineage. And so he wrote a commentary on Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. There's obviously Jiva Goswami wrote a commentary, but then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wrote a commentary, but it seemed like that wasn't enough for him. You know, he thought, okay, I've got to write some more on this text. It's such a beautiful text. So he wrote many supplementary books to help us go deeper into understanding it. Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu Bindu comes to mind, Madhurya Kadambini, and we know that's based on just 2 verses from the Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, so you can just imagine how deep he was going into it. And there are others as well. There was a really nice recent series of classes a little while back Padmanabh Maharaj gave on Raghavatma Chandrika. This was a really nice series, which draws out more details from the Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti side of things. I highly recommend that series. And of course, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wasn't the only acharya to give importance to the text. Many others, for example, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in different ways he wrote about it. As I think what comes to mind to me at the moment is his analysis on Shikshashtakam, that he kind of analyzed Shikshashtakam through these verses from Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu that Madhurya Kadambini is based on. But in the interest of time, I'd like to bring it a bit closer to home. So as I'm sure you're all aware, Srila Prabhupada, as we know, he produced a summary study on the Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu known as Nectar of Devotion. And what I personally found interesting is that although there were many facets to Srila Prabhupada's mission, if you look at the history at the time he published Nectar of Devotion, you look at the letters, the conversations, and so on, he often emphasized for those who were like committed to practicing bhakti, basically like committed devotees, this was a book for them. You know, this was the science of Krishna consciousness or bhakti. You know, of course, outreach was a major theme and these things as well. But when it came to practicing devotees, this was a book Prabhupada highlighted. Although I don't intend to, you know, we could spend the whole lecture kind of going through different quotes of Prabhupada, just emphasizing this nectar of devotion. But one that stands out nicely, I think, which is worth sharing, I think it's quite sweet also, because it connects to our lineage, is in a talk he gave in Vrindavan on nectar devotion. So he said, my Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, he used to advise to read Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, everyone after initiation. At least he advised me. So this Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu is very important as a study book for the Vaishnavas. It is the science of devotional service. And in his preface also, Srila Prabhupada said that persons engaged in Krishna consciousness movement may take advantage of this great literature and be very solidly situated in Krishna consciousness. So he's really like emphasizing that for those who have kind of said, okay, this is my life, you know, this is what I want to be about, bhakti. This is the book to tell you how to do that. You know, this is where it's at. So to come even closer to home for us personally, for many of us on the call who are either students of our Guru Maharaj or are inspired by our Guru Maharaj, Swami Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Maharaj, there's a couple of interesting notes in relation to Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu with him also. I'm sure many of you know, he's often commented that he spent time with Srila Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu Maharaj. When he would see him in Navadvip, he spent some of that time studying Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu with him, which is quite a nice bit of history. And our Guru Maharaj also funded the first printing of Srila Narayana Maharaj's Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu Bindu. So you can see this in the acknowledgements in the first edition, if any of you have that. I think you can find it online also. But more recently, when he was asked what we're all eagerly anticipating his new book, right? When it's time, the time is right. But when he was asked recently about what he considers writing next, one of the inspirations he said he's had is a condensed form of Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. So it's quite a unique text, an important text, sorry, and we're crossing our fingers on that one. But personally, for me also, in my early days of Krishna consciousness, I was taught many wrong things about Raganuga Bhakti, for example, that I really felt afterwards I needed to clear up after the experience. And although I don't intend to speak directly on Raganuga Bhakti, although I'm sure it will come up indirectly related to some of the topics we get into, for anyone wanting to go deeper into that, on the Shabda Brahman website, there's a nice section on Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. And our Guru Maharaj has given wonderful lectures on this topic of Raganuga Bhakti. I highly recommend. And also I mentioned earlier about Padmanabha Maharaj's series on Raghavatma Chandrika. So as a book in itself, there have been signs again and again. It's something that personally I need to pay attention to on my journey. And so hopefully be able to share something helpful through this series. So although there are many topics dealt with in Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, I think one of the main themes, and actually the theme of all our scriptural canons, is about refining our desire, right? If we think about it, by nature, we're desiring beings. Obviously, I'm putting it in quite a simplistic way, but if you think like karmis, or those who are in the realm of karma, desire happiness from material things, whereas jnanis, they desire happiness, but by being free of material entanglement. And then obviously bhaktas or devotees desire to bring Krishna pleasure. And then I guess on the topmost platform, you could say Radha desires to bring pleasure to Krishna, and Krishna desires to bring pleasure to Radha. So obviously in between all these things, there are many shades of gray, and I'm putting it in quite a simplistic way, but at our essence, that's what we're about. We're desiring beings. And so on that note, there are many angles we could explore this theme in relation to Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. Let's say, in a liberated stage, let's say, a Bhava Bhakta or a Prema Bhakta, they desire to bring pleasure to Krishna in various ways through rasa, hence the name Rasaraj of Krishna, and the invocation of Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu proclaims him as Akila Rasamrita Murti, so the embodiment of all rasas or all flavors of love. And so this book actually is mostly on those topics about refining one's desire according to a particular taste. But that, of course, is a whole topic in itself, and not one I personally feel I have the adhikar to speak on so much, not more than on a theoretical level. But there are many nice talks on the Shabda Brahman website, and also different devotees have been given in the Tattva Vivek series. But we're going to mainly be swimming or paddling in the Eastern Ocean, and actually mainly the first two chapters, and explore this concept of refining our desire so that maybe we can embrace those higher concepts beyond the theoretical level at some point. So this refining of desire is brought out in that famous verse that defines Uttama Bhakti, Anya Bilashi Tashunyam Yanar Kamajinavritam Anukulyena Krishna Nushilanam Bhaktir Uttama. We'll read the translation in a little bit and get into the meaning of that. But what the point of it is that the whole Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu kind of revolves around this verse. This is the thesis, you could say, the driving verse from which all the topics proceed from. But before we get into that, I know you might be hanging for the translation if you don't already know, although I'm sure most of you already know this translation. But before we want to get to that, I want to rewind a bit just to kind of set the stage and to the Bhagavad Gita. So we can see this refining of one's desire is quite prominent in the flow of the Gita. I see Shamananda Prabhu there. He recently gave this really nice series on Bhagavad Gita on the first chapter. And one of the things he brought out there, I think it was in the first class, but this concept of selfishness to selflessness, and I think that's a really great lens to view the Gita through. I know Ashram Maharaj, he wrote an article along these lines. It's a nice article you can find on The Harmonist. And our Guru Maharaj has spoken on it in various ways also, this concept of selfishness to selflessness and how the Gita kind of takes one through that. And we have a weekly Gita study group here, amongst local devotees. And something that struck me recently, we were on the second chapter, and it's quite interesting in Krishna's discourse to Arjuna. Quite early on, he's addressing Arjuna's arguments on the platform of Dharma, because you remember many of Arjuna's arguments were on this platform of Dharma or Karma Kanda. And Krishna, to encourage him to fight, he invokes that prospect of the heavenly kingdom or heavenly gain, or the kingdom on earth, or even he kind of prods him with his prestige of a great warrior. So he's kind of, and these kind of material things we might think. But in the very next verse, he retires that motivation very quickly, right? He says, don't be concerned for victory or defeat, happiness, distress, or any of these things. So I find it quite interesting, even there, Krishna in the Gita, he says, and we know as we progress through the Gita, ultimately he says, do it out of love for me, because Krishna never wavers from encouraging Arjuna to fight. Every step of the way, he's saying, Arjuna, fight, Arjuna, fight, Arjuna, fight. But the motivation behind the fighting gets more and more refined. So it's going from karma kanda to nishkama karma yoga and so on, and ultimately full surrender to Krishna. And so that's all coming from Krishna's own instructions. Krishna is encouraging him on all these levels, or all these levels of refinement, let's say, but obviously to bring him to the highest place. So to jump from the Gita to the Bhagavatam, we recently heard these wonderful classes. Guru Maharaj gave this wonderful class on Bhagavan Nrsingadev, and this was one of the favorites, obviously, of Lord Chaitanya to hear, recited by Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And Prahlad, of course, amongst many things, he's an emblem of Sharanagati, someone who could approach even the most ferocious form of the Lord, because he's free from material desires. Even the demigods were a bit afraid to approach Lord Nrsingadev. And a lot could be drawn from that. But the other pastime I wanted to focus on in relation to what we're discussing today is the other pastime that Mahaprabhu loved to hear. And of course, that was that of Dhruva Maharaj. And so many things can be drawn from that Leela. And especially as I've understood, one of the main points for us as sadhakas or practitioners of bhakti is developing that firm determination that Dhruva Maharaj had, as well as obviously glorifying the power of bhakti, that even when it's practiced in a mixed way, it gives such great results. I believe Dhruva Maharaj, he's sometimes given as an example of like materialistic devotee or Kama Mishra Bhakta. But at least at that point in his progression in the Bhagavatam. But obviously another and probably the most remembered point from that Leela or that pastime, at least in my experience, is that Dhruva, upon attaining realization of Vishnu, he realized he probably wasted his time with such an intense desire, because in his words, the kingdom that he's now was desiring and is now going to attain, they were like pieces of glass compared to the most valuable jewel that he attained, obviously, when he had darshan of Vishnu. So he kind of realized how insignificant that desire was. And so, yeah, one takeaway is that the bhakti practices are so powerful in themselves, but to use them for something material is a waste of time. And so this might not even be a kingdom, you know, we might not be after a kingdom and these kind of things, but it can be subtle things, you know, might even be like the pride of being a great devotee and so on. I mean, there are so many things, and we might find that we've got some of those things in ourselves, especially if you study Madhurya Kadambini and see the obstacles that devotees face, especially in the early stages of practicing bhakti. But to kind of like bring it back to where we're going, that if we can at least recognize those things, if we have this conceptual orientation of what Uttama Bhakti is and what it isn't, then we can refine our desire. And that's a big part of what sadhana bhakti is about. It's about refining our desire. So at least until one gets to the stage of nishta or ruchi, because as we mentioned earlier, there's also refining of one's desire in those stages too, especially in ruchi, but that takes a different form. But from where we are, at least personally speaking, this concept's also there in these stages of sadhana, early stages of sadhana even. Our Guru Maharaj sometimes says that bhakti is not a practice to be done without being thoughtful or reflective. So it's not that we like unconsciously go full steam ahead, although that might be needed at some stages to get going. I know I've been there for sure. There's just kind of, okay, just do it. And you kind of do it mindlessly for a while. But at some point, I think we've all had the experience. You got to slow down a little bit and think about what you're doing. I know Guru Maharaj speaks about his experience on this. But after all, any connection to bhakti, even unthoughtfully, we know is so beneficial, but how much more so if we refine those motivations, refine those desires, because Krishna, as he says in the Gita, as we approach him, or as we surrender and so on, I reciprocate accordingly. He reciprocates according to how we approach. So this points out another aspect of the grace of sadhu sangha, that to have a devotee like Rupa Goswami mark all these things out and have these points brought out by sadhus such as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, our own Guru Maharaj, and other great Vaishnavas, we can go deeper into our own practice. And so this is one way that mercy or grace manifests itself. You know, sometimes we think in the beginning, we might hear things like this, it's going to be like a magic force. If I just surrender, if I surrender, then I'll get this magic laser or whatever from Guru. And then now we're pure all of a sudden because I'm surrendering, right? And we all know that's not the case. That's not the experience. Even just the conceptual orientation that is brought out in these texts and by our teachers and so on shines a light on those things that we may need to refine within ourselves and gives us that motivation to do so at the same time. Sometimes, personally speaking, I know I can get caught up even in the philosophy of things and the higher topics and even the practices of bhakti, and sometimes kind of forget or kind of lose focus of the reason why I'm doing them. And so obviously bhakti is extremely powerful in all her forms, and any connection is a great thing. But thankfully, we've also got good sadhu sangha, so we can also kind of learn to refine our desires and refine how we move forward in bhakti. And so this brings us now to kind of the driving verse that, at least for today, but also for the rest of the sessions, because as I say, this is really the thesis of Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. And so that's this verse 1.1.11, that obviously I'm sure most of you are well aware of. Anya bilashita shunyam yanarkama janavritam anukulyena krishnanu shilanam bhakti uttama. So I'm going to read Bhanu Swami. I'm sure there are other translations, but Bhanu Swami's translation, Maharaj, he's got a nice edition that has commentaries of Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And so he defines in this way, he translates in this way: the highest bhakti is defined as continuous service or emotions directed towards Krishna, his expansion forms, or others related to him, with a pleasing attitude towards Krishna. It should be devoid of desires other than the desire to please the Lord, and unobstructed by impersonal jnana, the materialistic rituals of karma, or other unfavorable acts. So, as I say, this verse, it's the thesis of the whole rest of the book, and the whole, not only the book, but the whole practice of our sampradaya revolves around this verse, at least to my understanding. And I don't intend to go through word by word and these kind of things and go into it. Although I do recommend anyone interested, do read the commentaries of Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. It brings out a lot of the meaning of this verse and goes into the different characteristics of bhakti, but I don't intend to go into these like the Swarup Lakshan and the Tatashta Lakshan, the internal characteristics or the primary characteristics and the secondary characteristics, but more in relation to our discussion of refining our desire. We might read that verse. I know personally, I've sometimes had this feeling, you read this verse and think, well, I may as well close the book now, right? I just may as well close the book now. Because apart from, let's say, unfavorable acts I might engage in or lack of continuous service, you know, I'm certainly not serving 24/7, I'm not in continuous service. And nor can I say that I'm devoid of desires other than the desire to please the Lord. I'd like to be, but I'm not there, you know? And so this is what this series is going to explore from a few different angles. Some of you may indeed fit this definition. And I guess in sadhana bhakti, this could be applied to someone maybe at Nishta or maybe Ruchi. I think Ruchi more corresponds with retiring of material desires and is more considered Shuddha bhakti, depending on, I guess, who's defining. But what about those who have Nishta as our interim goal, as Guru Maharaj might say? Like, how does this verse and the rest of the Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu apply to us? And so that's kind of what this series is about. And of course, I spent quite a bit of the first part of this talk emphasizing the text. So it's obviously not my feeling that we should just close the book. You know, I wouldn't have chosen it as the theme or the book to kind of focus on. So I think the main takeaway for today, and something that we're going to explore for the rest of the series, is that we are students of this verse. I like this kind of conceptual orientation, as Guru Maharaj might say, you know, that we're students of this verse. And so the more we understand and refine our desire, the closer we'll come to embodying it fully. So next time, we're going to explore adhikar a little more, which will hopefully make things more encouraging for us who are wondering where we might fit in the culture of Uttama Bhakti, even if we're still in the early stages. But I think it's an important one, because just to give an example, for not so recent, but I have a good friend of mine, a very, very nice devotee I sometimes have conversations with on various things. And I remember we were having a discussion on this verse, and he had this conception that this verse only applies to Mahabhagavat devotees or those beyond sadhana, that it doesn't really apply to us. And it didn't really make sense to me, because this is the thesis of the whole book. As I say, it's like this is kind of where everything else that Rupa Goswami is going to talk about is kind of springboarding from, or trying to emphasize and shine light on. So we had like a friendly discussion, and after a few days, he sent me a message, a really nice message, that kind of confirmed this understanding that he had read in his Guru Maharaj's Madhuri Kadambini, that one can be practicing pure bhakti or uttama bhakti even in the sadhana stage, at least in the context of this being a school of pure bhakti. So sometimes there can be a tendency, because we hear things that are actually very high, you know, I'm sure those of you who've been around a while, you've heard, you know, so many high topics and so many, you know, speaking about bhava and prema and all these things that certainly we should hear about. They're wonderful. You know, I personally, I enjoy hearing about them and like this, but we may feel when we hear some of these things, we may feel, and may very well be, far away from that goal. And it can be quite disheartening. And sometimes even if we're not quite clear on the path of bhakti, it can be quite disempowering as well, as if we need to wait for permission to practice pure bhakti in the sense that I'm talking about it. So actually, this is the reason why books like Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu are written, and Madhuri Kadambini and so on. So we can start refining our desire from day one if we've decided, I'm seriously committing to this path. You know, this is the reason why I do my practices. And obviously, Shravanam is such an important limb of bhakti, because hearing about these things, especially from those who actually have attained these things and like that, you know, they really help us contemplate these things and remind ourselves of why we're doing the things we're doing. Why are we doing, you know, what is this science of devotion like that? So the point is our Guru Maharaj sometimes puts it in this way, that to even have a sense of prema bhakti as being our goal, that the bhakti herself is the way to attain it. To have this sense is to have been touched by this bhakti in some kind of way. The Uttama Bhakti, as undoubtedly anyone hearing these talks will have been, has given us this invitation. Bhakti Devi has given us this invitation. I think that's a nice way of putting it, because just to even like have a sense of that, that's an invitation in itself. Now, what we do with that invitation obviously is down to us, but and obviously, the mercy we receive along the way, which comes from sadhu sangha, but it's really, that invitation's already been there. We don't need permission to practice Uttama Bhakti, because that's the school that we're in. So, for example, go into the translation of that verse. We may not be continuously engaged in service, which really, as I understand, is there at the stage of nishta. But if we have set that the reason for our practice to come to this stage in the context of the whole path, then we're in that school of Uttama Bhakti. We're not aiming for a kingdom like Dhruva Maharaj, right? By our practice, at least hopefully not. We're not chanting our japa thinking, oh, I'd really like to have a big castle or whatever it is. We've all got our different desires, right? Mine's not a castle, for the record. So it's true. We might have other interests. So this is, I guess, this is an important point. It's true, we might have other interests in our hearts, other desires in our hearts as well. And so in the entire context of this, the meaning of this verse, or the context of Uttama Bhakti as a whole, the whole book of Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, let's say, we may be far from being pure devotees. Not everyone, of course. I know there's quite a wide range of devotees who listen to these talks. So I'm speaking more from where I'm at, but I'm sure many of you can relate also. Although we may be far from being pure devotees in the strictest sense of the term, as we know, Srila Prabhupada would often say, well, I don't know often, but I know he has said, that all my devotees are pure devotees. And that's kind of the whole point of Sadhana Bhakti section of the book, Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, is to bring one from those very early stages all the way to the topmost goal. And part of that includes either clearing these other interests from our hearts or bringing them into relation to Bhakti somehow or other. But the eligibility to walk that path in the first place is faith. Actually, it's faith in the process. Shraddha, or as I mentioned, a sense that by engaging in this practice, these other things will become less significant, or we'll be able to dovetail them. To use a Prabhupadism like that, and then we can embody this 111 verse in the fullest sense. So we have gained eligibility. It may not be by our own doing, as we know, it's by mercy, really. So it may not be by our own doing, but by having come in contact with devotees who embody this directly or indirectly, we have that eligibility. So that's what we're going to be exploring more in this series, is refining this intention behind our practice. And even if we do find we have other desires and these things, and that's something we'll get into in later sessions, how we perform our bhakti practices. But really, we're performing them to come closer to Krishna, to serving him, to serving his devotees, and so on. And it might not mean that our desires instantly vanish, but they won't. But even though they won't instantly vanish, they won't become a covering on our practice. I've read previously Guru Maharaj. Our Guru Maharaj having a conversation with a scholar on this topic, and it makes this point that this meaning, one of the meanings of this word, or kind of the essence of the meaning, is a covering on bhakti when it relates to karma kanda and jnana kanda, for example, like this. And so similarly with our other desires, they shouldn't become a covering on our practice. Obviously, if we follow in Dhruva Maharaj's footsteps in the fullest sense of the term, then maybe it would be a covering on our bhakti, But if we just follow his determination like this, but with this conceptual orientation, then it won't become a covering on our practice, because we know we're practicing rather at this stage, let's say, to cleanse our hearts or to redirect them, at least until we're in higher stages. So although we may be beginners, we can engage in processes of Uttama Bhakti. So this is Shravanam, Kirtanam, and so on. And this is a great blessing even to be able to do that, Yeah, so I mean, I'm repeating myself a lot in what I'm saying, I know. and I'm also being a bit simplistic, and that's something we're going to go deeper into, I think, in future sessions. But part of this understanding and part of this path, and Madhuri Kandambini and so on, is that it lays out many of the obstacles we may face while traversing this path of Uttama Bhakti, even before the stage of Nishta, for example. Sometimes, because the Bhagavatam even says, this verse that Gaurasundar Prabhu was exploring, these verses he was exploring, really, it speaks about Naishtika Bhakti, right? This Nishta Bhakti, continuous Bhakti, and like this is what really leads to Bhava, which is the purpose of sadhana, and like that. But as we know, even the stages before that have been laid out by our acharyas. They've been laid out by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in Madhurya Kadambini and so on. And so it's really great, because it means this is also by their mercy. This is also part of the path. And so even though we might get distracted in Anishta Bhajana Kriya sometimes and these kind of things, especially as the purifying process brings out some of our conditioning, that if we continue on this and obviously work to overcome these things, and Krishna will teach us along the way, Guru will teach us along the way, and these things, then actually we're on this path of Uttama Bhakti. There was a nice interview with Guru Nishta Prabhu, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, but I've only recently got around to hearing it, and he was speaking about his experience with this, that a lot of our conditioning, when we really take up this process quite sincerely, and quite dedicated, or as much as we can from where we're at, then a lot of our conditioning does come out. We can really recognize, I guess it relates to, I've often heard it related to this pastime of churning the ocean in the Bhagavatam. A lot of the poison comes out first before the nectar comes out, and so on. A lot of our anarthas come before us, a lot of our obstacles and so on. But we're in good hands because we've got good sadhu sangha who can help us navigate these things and help us stay connected to our practice. And this is another reason why texts like Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu are so important, even if some of the things might be theoretical at this stage. And obviously hearing Qatar, especially, hearing our Guru Maharaj and other saintly devotees, is so important and such an important part of the process. And so, yeah, so this is what this series is going to be about refining our desires with very powerful practices. Really, yeah, I know I'm repeating myself, but just to make the point that we aren't doing these practices for any reason except to make advancement in spiritual life, to come to a place where everything we do is to satisfy Krishna's desire. And it may take some time, but that's okay. Patience is a virtue, as it said, that there's no better goal to strive for. And so the more we hear about this goal as well, we understand that, yeah, how can there be a better goal to strive for? So we, whether we're pure bhaktas or not pure bhaktas in the fullest sense of the term, we're practicing pure bhakti because we've been touched by Mahaprabhu's school. And so because we've been touched by Mahaprabhu's school, we can be certain we're students in that school if we've made that kind of the goal, Dhruva's pole star, so to speak, of our path, or where we're going with what we want. So yeah, I guess Guru Maharaj sometimes makes this point that the more we hear about these things and we understand the ideal, the more we understand how attractive it is and why it's worth doing. There's sometimes the uncomfortable feeling of cleansing our hearts, but also we can also be realistic about the stages that we're going through from where we're at and these things and the challenges we face, so that we can practice in a healthy and progressive way. Because that's really, Krishna, even in the Gita, he speaks so much on this concept of balance, right? The balance is so important. And so by understanding these things and exploring these things that I hopefully for myself and hopefully others can gain something from it, this series is going to kind of explore this refining our desire and refining our conceptual orientation on many of these things that even we might take for granted sometimes. And so I'm very much appreciating the Tattva Vivek series for these reasons too, to hearing different stories and perspectives on the path that we all find ourselves on, right? Anyone who's tuned in right now, this is the path you find yourself on. You wouldn't be tuned in otherwise. So with that, I know it's a little early, but I'm going to take Brigupad Prabhu's advice. He said keep 40 minutes or so is kind of a good amount of time. And so I'd like to end with one quote I read recently from my Guru Maharaj that I think captures what this Refining Our Desires series will be exploring, especially for those who are still feeling the pull of karma while actually wanting to embrace this ideal of the 1:111 verse. So this was in a Sangha from many years ago. He used to have this newsletter, this Q&A. And so I'm just going to read an excerpt. It was to do along the lines, the question was to do with what this verse in the Gita, of what will repression accomplish? And so I'm just going to read an excerpt from that answer to conclude with. Overall, we should know that progressive spiritual culture does not involve black and white determinations with regard to our karmic nature. If the pure white of spiritual reality is our ideal, over time, this pure ideal will pull us from the black abyss of our lower nature, albeit passing through many shades of gray along the way. So I'll read it one more time. Overall, we should know that progressive spiritual culture does not involve black and white determinations with regard to our karmic nature. If the pure white of spiritual reality is our ideal, over time, this pure ideal will pull us from the black abyss of our lower nature, albeit passing through many shades of gray along the way. So with that, I think I'm going to conclude, because then we're going to kind of go on to different topics for the next time, although obviously related, all to do with this Refining Our Desire. So I guess I can open up if anyone has any comments or realizations or corrections or questions, please feel free. I think you can unmute yourself. I'll make sure of that in a second. Yeah, and I think also, I think the idea is questions in the Tattva Vivek group on Facebook also, but feel free. I know I've left quite a lot of space before the usual ending, so feel free if you have anything to add or just, yeah. So I think you can all unmute yourself if you like. I'll leave it a minute or two.
Just a second. No.
Dhanyavad Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Jai.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. I really liked how enthusiastic and I very much liked your presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, do you feel reading Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion is what's the difference between that and the Bhanu Maharaj's translation, for example? Do you feel you get kind of the same out of both?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you, Prabhu, and thank you for your encouragement. I really appreciated your classes on how to give class. So, you know, I'm still learning, but yeah, that's a great question. And I think an important thing to note on Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion is that it is a summary study of the Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. We here, for some time, we've got like a mixed sangha, different sanghas come together, different missions, and we were studying Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu together, and the way we approached it was we would start with the section related to the verses in Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu from Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion, and then we would read this book, I'm sure you're familiar with, Waves of Devotion, by Damodar Maharaj. And so that's quite nice because he wrote that, I believe, before Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu was translated by Bhanu Swami. So I think he took a lot of what is there from the source text. I believe he also spoke to many sadhus, I believe Srila Narayan Maharaj and some others. And so he kind of was fleshing out some more also and kind of explaining some of what Srila Prabhupada had written in Nectar of Devotion for devotees to go deeper into that text. So as a kind of study guide along with it. And then obviously now we've got the good fortune of having these commentaries directly translated, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Jiva Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami. But in regards to your question, I think Nectar Devotion is wonderful, and I do recommend reading it. But I do think it is important for devotees also to read it alongside, whether it's with this the source text, or with some devotees who can explain things, because I think there are some things in there that need more explaining. Just to give one example, I know it's the famous example, but let's take Raganuga Bhakti, the section on Raganuga Bhakti, that sometimes I think, and I don't know whether it's editorial errors or what, and these kind of things, but there is sometimes Srila Prabhupada will use the term Raganuga Bhakti in quite a general way sometimes, in terms of relating it to spontaneous devotion, you know. And at least my experience, I know, I've seen sometimes devotees can take that, especially in the early stages, as I'm being spontaneous, okay, I'm practicing Raganuga Bhakti, you know, and it becomes a kind of, just because I do something spontaneous. Whereas in Vaidhi Bhakti, as we know, Vaidhi Bhakti, as a path into itself to attain, let's say, Vaikuntha and so on, it's not that there's no spontaneity there, especially in higher stages and these things. It's more the motivation behind which we practice that bhakti. And so for me personally, I feel I wouldn't have been able to come to that understanding of Raganuga Bhakti, and I guess the nuances, especially in relation to our particular school, our particular sampradaya, without the source texts translated, or at least devotees like our Guru Maharaj, for example, and others explaining these things just by reading Nectar of Devotion. But I do recommend reading it. It's a wonderful, it's my favorite book. I also loved Vishnu Jan Swami's enthusiasm in the early days for Nectar of Devotion. If you ever read this book, Radha Damodar Vilas, it's about Vishnu Jan Swami and Jayananda, and Prabhu, and that's really wonderful too, his enthusiasm for Nectar Devotion. He also has some nice classes. There's only 2 or 3 recordings, but he gave some classes on Nectar Devotion. And in the early days of my bhakti practice, I found them so nourishing. I listened to them over and over, you know. Just like you say, his enthusiasm in these things, I really appreciated them. So yeah, sorry, I quite long-winded, but yeah, I recommend it, but I think it's good to have the 2 together personally.
Thank you. I just wanted to say another thing. One book that I personally recommend is Bon Maharaj's edition of Bhakti-rasamrita-sindhu.
Oh, thank you.
He translated only the first quarter, but it's very nicely done. It came out in, I think, 66 or something like that. Prabhupada, he didn't always have a very harmonious relationship with Bon Maharaj, but even he liked this book. Is Bhakti-rasamrita-sindhu. He summarizes the commentaries of Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti, and also Mukunda Das Goswami. So it's a very nice book, and I think it's available online as well.
Oh, thank you. That's definitely on the to buy list then, the wish list or whatever. Thank you. Yeah, anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we finish up?
Haribo. Haribo.
Oh, Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for the class. I'm very, very excited for the coming ones.
Oh, thank you.
and I wanted to just mention also, I think this edition of Bon Maharaj that Prigu just mentioned was the one that Guru Maharaj was studying at Srila Maharaj's place, if I remember right. I think he said that.
Ah, nice.
And there is a PDF available online of it.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah.
And
definitely get that one. Sorry.
I wanted to say also that I heard Guru Maharaj say in a lecture at Audarya that he was encouraging devotees to learn the Eastern wave of Bhakti-rasamrita-sindhu inside out, back and forth, inside out, kind of, and because he said it should be given to the world, like what is in there. So I'm just transferring this burden to you that I heard.
That's really appreciated. It's encouraging to hear, you know, because it is such a special book. I think there's for me personally, like I say, I've found it so encouraging every step of the way, you know, and it's as I say, I'm no expert in it, but it's something I'd like to. So that's encouraging to hear that was Guru Maharaj's instructions. Okay, we must know it inside out, back to front, and these things. And yeah, and thank you also for the addition on what it was Guru Maharaj was studying. Also, I'm definitely going to check this edition out. I've not come across it myself. Ah. Okay, so yeah, hopefully with some of the Spanish speaking devotees, there's a great service opportunity for someone there. That's absolutely. Thank you, Prabhu, and thank you for your translating too. I hope I wasn't too babbling motor mouth sometimes. Okay, so unless there's any other thoughts or comments, I guess we'll wrap up for now, and then yeah, we'll continue next week. And looking forward to more of the Tattva Vivek series through the week. It's trying to stay on top of it is a great savor in itself, isn't it? It's really wonderful. We're drowning in in Katha, so let's keep that up. And so yeah, so thank you everybody. Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Mohan Prabhu ki jai.
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 Jai. Jai.
Stop.